Welcome to part 2 of working with patterns in Studio One 4. Let's just go ahead and dive right into this. I'm going to set the song position cursor at bar 2 and then Control, Shift, and P to add a pattern. I'll press the / on the QWERTY keyboard to activate our loop. Let's double click to open up the editor. Now in part 1 we spent some time covering the global settings up top here, the steps, resolution, swing, and so on. So in part 2, we're going to go a little bit deeper into that and how they relate to the individual settings within our lanes here. So on our instrument track up above, I have an impact loaded with a preset kit. And just to do a quick review, we saw that these 4 columns, these alternating gray colors, really represent the 4 beats in our song. We are in 4/4 time. So the click track is active. If I go ahead and play back, we can see 1, 2, it's the counts 1, 2, 3, and 4 match up with the beginning of each column. So just to get our bearings here, if you're new to working with patterns and step sequencing, and by default, when we create our patterns, they're going to be for 1 bar, and our quantized value is set to 16th notes up above there. And so we can see we have 16 subdivisions, and these are going to match up directly with the 16 steps that we have here. So if we come to our kick beef and add a kick on 1, 5, 9, and 13, which is the first column in each of these 4 beats, we can see that we add MIDI data to our MIDI part at the beginning of each beat. Now, if we were to change the quantize to quarter notes, we can see we only have 4 divisions, and these essentially match up with the 4 columns as well. We just don't have that higher resolution that's visible in our ruler. So I'm going to change that back to 16th notes. And changing the quantized values up above does not change the functionality of this down below. So we can then come in and add our snare, and as we saw in part 1, we've got our 4 on the floor with our snare at the beginning of bar 2 and 4. But what if we would like to create a pattern that is longer than 1 bar? Well, what we could do is come up to the steps. This is the global control for our steps. And then we can change that to 32, just doubling the steps. And then now we have our second bar here. We can see we have 4 new columns, 4 new beats, but we do need to make an adjustment up above, because if I play back with our loop set up, we're just going to cycle over these 16 steps that we initially had. So I'll close out the editor. I'm going to press W to zoom out a bit and then come to the edge and pull this out for 1 more bar. I'll hold Alt and click in the time ruler to set the right locator there. And then let's double click on that pattern. And so at this point, when I play back, we can see that we move on to the additional 16 steps that we added. And I'm going to press C on the QWERTY keyboard to turn off that click track. So now we can come in and so now we have a pattern that is 2 bars in length. And we can continue this on all the way up to 64, creating a pattern with a maximum length of 4 bars. And just know that we can also click on this field here and enter in a value if we'd like. So if we wanted to put in 16, and we can even put odd numbers in here as well. The only number that you can't put in is 1. It's just going to default to at least 2. So any number that you'd like to put in besides 1 all the way up to 64 is available. But let's take that back to our 32 steps. Now we can also change the resolution of our steps by clicking on this global control here. If we were to change that to, say, quarter notes, then you can see that that's going to affect our pattern up above. And we're only cycling through the first 8 steps here. And the reason why that is because if we change the resolution to quarter notes, then each step is going to get 1 beat. And each bar has 4 beats. So then we've got 4 beats for the first bar and then 4 beats for our second bar. So that's how the resolution is going to work along with what we have in our song or the arrange view. Now, if we were to change this to 30-second, let's play that back. Okay, it's going to kind of speed that up because we are doubling the information that's contained within our pattern. But let's take this back to our 16th note setting and move on to these the step and resolution for each individual lane. And I think actually let's just right click and clear out the pattern, and I'd like to change the steps back to the default of 16, and let's bring in our pattern up above in the arrange view back to the original 1 bar just to make this a bit more simpler to understand. So we're back to having our 16 steps matching up with our 16th note subdivisions, but we can come in individually and say for the kick, we can change its steps to 4. I'll press enter to accept that. Now we just have 4 steps. I can put a kick on beat 1 and you can see that it automatically populates the other 3 beats because it's just going to cycle over this 1 beat repeatedly. If I were to come to our snare and add that on 5, and let's say we change the steps to 8, then even though we only have 1 step added, it's going to cycle over these 8 steps twice within our bar because we have 16 steps. So it's just going to repeat the 8 for our first 8, the first half of the bar, and then for the second half of the bar. So if I play this back, we're going to still have our 4 and our 4 on the floor with the snare, even though we don't have, our lane doesn't go all the way out to the full 16 steps. So I hope that the behavior is becoming clear to those who may have been confused in how the steps in the resolution is going to function along with our arrange view timeline. Now let's see if we can find a little hat here. Now we can fill in these, say if we like hats all throughout the 16 steps. Let's play that back. Now if we wanted to play those back at a higher resolution, we can click on the resolution here and let's change that to 30 seconds and then let's play that back. Okay, so we can hear we have that quicker pace for our hi-hat, and the lane has been cut in half because we can only fit 32 steps into 1 bar because that's all that can fit into the 1 bar. We can do 4 beats or 8 eighth notes, 16 16th notes, or 32 30 seconds. So that's why we're going to have these adjustments that are made within the lane when we change the resolution here. Now, if we were to change this to 64th notes, then we should only have this first bar, this first beat filled in. So let's go ahead and change that to 64th, and we can see how that works. And then if we play that back, we've got a bit of insanity. All right, I'm going to right click and clear out the pattern. And let's change all of these back to as they were. I wonder if we still need to come in individually. So 16, we want that at 16, and we want to change this back to 16th note resolution. Our resolution up above. Okay, there we go. So what do we have available in our contextual menu here? We can copy a lane, which we don't have any information on the lane, but we can fill those in, right click, copy that lane. We've got another kick here. So if we'd like to say double up our kick, we can right click and then paste. And now we've got two kicks easily put together. Next up, we have duplicate steps. So let's take these two out. We've got a beat on, or a kick on beat 1 and beat 2. For this lane, I'll right click, let's duplicate those steps, and then that fills in the other two beats, 3 and 4. Next, we have clear lane, and I'm selected on a lane that doesn't have any information. So if I select this kick, right click, we can clear that lane out. I'll Control Z to bring those back, just to show we can always, whenever we have a lane selected, just press the delete key on the QWERTY keyboard to take those steps out. Coming back to the menu, we've got fill lane. So whatever lane we have selected, let's come back to our hats. We can right click here and fill that lane, and those will automatically be populated. We can choose to set every second step, and we have our kick fly. So every second step is filled in, and while this lane is selected, I'll press delete just to show that some of these functions within the contextual menu match up with these quick buttons here. So we saw we can add on every fourth step, we can clear it. Every second step, clear that. And then we have the fill that's in the contextual menu as well. I'll right click again. Then we have shift lane. So if I select the kick beef here, right click and shift lane, then that moves those one step ahead. And that ties in also with the quick access button here. That's going to shift our notes as well. I'll Control Z to take those back. We can double our lane resolution, changing that to 32 steps and 30-second notes. We can half the lane resolution. And we could copy our pattern, come to the inspector here and add a blank new pattern. And then if I right click, we can paste that information in there. But a quicker way to do that may be to just use the duplicate button. And once we add that, we create a new variation with that same information, just saving us clicks rather. So I'm going to select that variation 3. Let's remove that. And variation 2, we'll remove that. Now we have a duplicate pattern and duplicate steps. These are going to be available only in the rhythmic mode, and we're going to take a look at that in a second. We've got our clear pattern, which we've seen. We can double the resolution and half the resolution. So this is going to affect our entire pattern. I'll Control Z to come back to as we were. So let's now take a look at the melodic mode. I will F2 to close out that editor. Let's come to the browse, bring in a Mai Tai. And I'm just going to choose, let's say, a lead. Okay, we've got that loaded up. Then we will set our song position cursor, Control Shift and P to add another pattern. Double click on that and we're automatically taken to the melodic mode when we are working with a VST that is not a drum machine. And we still have our similar global controls for steps, resolution, swing, and gate. We don't have those quick add buttons because we're working with a little bit differently here with our piano roll, but we can see what keys we are on, A3, G3, exactly where we are. We can use the mouse wheel to scroll up and down. So let's just populate. Okay, I'm going to mute the impact and let's hear how this sounds. Okay, we've kind of got an arpeggiated sequence here, and we can right click and then duplicate, and this is where the duplicate comes into play. We can also press D on the QWERTY keyboard, but I'll choose duplicate, and then that fills in the other two beats, 3 and 4. Okay, and we can have multiple notes within each column. So if I add a couple of notes here, let's play this back. Okay, and we're not hearing those because when we are working with certain features within patterns, we need to keep in mind that the settings on our VST instrument are going to affect the behaviors. So right now, our My Tai is set to mono mode. So that's why we're not hearing those additional notes. Once we deactivate mono, we can see that we have 8 voices available to us versus in mono, we only have the 1. That's why it's not playing back those additional notes. So now when we close out My Tai, come back to the beginning of our pattern and play back, we can hear those additional notes. So melodic mode is pretty straightforward, and we've covered a lot of information already with using the drum mode. Let's move on to the automation lane, and we can access that by clicking on this icon down below. And this is going to be the same whether we're working in Impact. We have that same icon down below here. And we can always change the patterns between instruments just by clicking up above and selecting the particular track, or we can do it by selecting a particular pattern event within our song. So let's go ahead and access that automation lane. We start off with velocity, and so we can control the velocity of our notes by adjusting here, and this is going to affect each note in the entire column up above. So if we take this up to 81, then each of these 3 notes in column 4 will play back at that 81 setting. So let's listen to this. Okay, and again, we may need to check our settings within My Tai because I'm not hearing a difference. And we can see here that our velocity is all the way down to 0%. So if we take this up to 100, then My Tai is going to make use of the velocity information that is coming into it. Let's try this again. Okay. We then have repeat. And I actually think maybe moving back to the impact would be better for this. Let's mute our My Tai and unmute the impact. I'm going to clear that lane and just let's add our snare. So say we'd like to add a repeat to the snare, we can just come down below. We have that pencil tool. Okay, if we'd like to double up that kick on column 9. And let's actually give that a shot on our hat. Okay, and so we could take these all the way up to 10. And then next we have probability, and this is going to control how often the particular sound or sample is going to play back within our pattern as we cycle over and over. They're all set to 100% by default, so each time we pass over that step, that we will hear that sound. But as we decrease, let's say, and be sure that you're focusing on the lane that you'd like to focus on. So let's say we'd like to change the snare to not show up as much, say 50% of the time. Let's take this one down to about 75, 76, play back. You can hear that wasn't played back. Okay, so this is just going to add a bit more variation and dropouts based on algorithms and our setting that we have in probability. And I'm going to select the hats and clear out that lane. Let's come back to our snare. Probability, take these back up to 100. And then let's look at adding our own automation parameter. So the way that we can do that is by clicking on the ellipsis next to velocity here. And we are working in bank A with our drum sound. So let's expand that folder out and see what we have available. The snare, let me close this out for just a second. The snare is going to be on pad 3. So we're working in bank A. Let's open that up, pad 3. Let's see the parameters that are available for that pad. Let's work with, say, the filter cutoff. I'll double click. That's then added as a new parameter. And we can see that that shows up in the parameter automation lane. I'll close out the dialog here. And then by default, we're kind of letting all of the frequencies through because we're set at 20 kilohertz. And over to the left here, this is the global setting for impact. So let's open up impact really quickly. Move this over to the left a bit. And then if I adjust the filter cutoff, we can see that this is controlling the setting globally. Now, the settings that we have here are for each individual step. So I do want to leave this all the way up to let all of the frequencies through. And again, we want to be sure that everything is set properly within our VST, so the filter right now is not off. If we were to make adjustments within the parameter automation lane, we're not going to hear anything because right now this is powered off. So let's go ahead and activate that and close out the impact. And our snare here is on column 5 and 13. So we'd want to make adjustments for those. And by default, when I click and drag with this pencil tool, it's going to activate the setting for this column, but it's also going to adjust everything behind it. So when our level control is blue, all of the gray level controls will be adjusted after it. So if I adjust this marker, we can see those are adjusted behind it, the gray ones. The way that we can get rid of that behavior is holding Shift or Alt, and that way we activate everything. And while we're holding Alt, we can adjust everything. But mainly we want to have these all blue, so then now at this point we can come in and adjust these individually. So let's take the cutoff down for our second snare here, and let's hear how that sounds. It's really cutting a lot out. Okay, and let's bring our hat back in. I'm going to hold Alt and click the first one to make them all blue so I can adjust individually. And I'm going to start adjusting the cutoff for these. And I'll just click hold and create a little wave here. Let's check that out. And again, we need to be sure that our filter is active for that hat, which is here. That's powered off. Let's activate it, come back. And we can see the activity, the automation happening here, as well as hearing it, obviously. And we do have these indicators within the editor here. Whenever there's automation on a particular lane, we're going to have this blue LED that activates. So if I select our snare, we can see that we have active automation for the filter cutoff, and this is highlighted. Our clap, We don't have any steps added for it, but you can see there's no automation for those either. But when we come to our hat, we have active automation and the blue color here. Okay, and I think that basically covers about everything within working with our patterns. Actually, just a couple other things. We can actually have more than one automation lane open at a time. And the way that we could go about doing that is by clicking on the plus button. So then we can work with different parameters in tandem with one another, like so. We can hover at the borders here to adjust the size. We can take the editor up and pull that to make this more visible. And we can add even more lanes, adjust the spacing, and work with different parameters at the same time. To remove those, we can just click the minus button. And again, we click this icon to hide the automation lane in general. And then I don't think I mentioned each automation or each lane within our pattern editor has mute and solo controls. This is pretty obvious, but if you're new, just keep this in mind that if we play back, we can mute anything that we don't want to hear. And that's working with patterns in Studio One 4.